Welcome into the Fantasy Football Diagnostics Podcast, where we provide you with your weekly diagnosis of everything fantasy football. Whether it's season-long leagues, dynasty, DFS, or sometimes even IDP, we got you covered all year long. What's good? You know the vibes. Jon Jeune here at the real Jon Jeune _FF, and I'm back with another live episode of the Fantasy Football Diagnostics Podcast. Good morning, beautiful people. It is Friday, November 21st, 7 a.m. Eastern. And again, we are live as we usually are. It's week 12. We're officially in the playoff push. Lineups are getting tight. We've got all these injuries. Plus Denver, Chargers, Miami, Washington, all on bye this week. So today we're going to break down all the week 12 matchups that are remaining, under the radar players, overranked players, and of course, starts of the week to help you make those crucial lineup decisions heading into the weekend. Before we dive in, make sure you check out the FFDX Patreon. You can join for free to grab the FFDX cheat sheet or become a supporter for just $1 a month to get the weekly waiver wire article, expanded rankings, and access to the Sunday morning Q&A, which kicks off at noon, right before kickoff. So just head to patreon.com/FFDX. And actually right now we're running a promotion where you get everything under the hood at the supporter tier absolutely free up through Thanksgiving weekend. So that'll be the end of week 12 or week 13 rather. So, go ahead, check it out, see if, how you feel about it. And then, maybe you will join the FFDX supporter tier. Also, one other note, it is Thanksgiving next week. So if you are expecting a show on Friday, that will not happen. We will not have a Friday show, but don't worry, we'll still have the matchup show. That'll be on Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern live, and we'll cover every single game, right? There's we'll have 16 games, no teams on bye. So it'll be a little bit of a longer show, but it'll be the only matchup show of the week on Wednesday, and then we will not have another show until the following Tuesday. So, without further ado, let's jump into the week 12 matchup show. So we got to recap last week, and last week, y'all, was not a very good week at all by any means. And I don't mean to laugh because I know some of y'all are probably did follow some of these recommendations, and a lot of them flopped. And just overall, it was just a very, very odd week with a lot of big name guys just flopping. But even some of these guys, obviously some of the guys I list here, they're not big names, so them flopping also not great. So I gotta do a better job. Just last week is not a week that I want associated with, or I want to be associated with, but I own it. 15 recommendations last week. We had 9 big misses, right? That means we had 9 guys that missed their ECR by 10 spots or more, right? So Caleb Williams, JJ McCarthy, that game was just atrocious. Sam Darnold, who flopped again for the second time the second week in a row. Woody Marks, who actually had a pretty good game last night, but flopped last Sunday. RJ Harvey, Pat Fryermuth, Khalil Shakir, Parker Washington, Ricky Pearsall. Right, those are all guys that missed their ECR by 10 spots or more. We had 2 guys miss their ECR outright in Tua Tagovailoa and Zay Flowers. Sorry, I'm realizing I might have given out more than 15 recommendations here, but it wasn't all bad, though. We had Tyler Algier hit, right, 9.6 PPR points. Doesn't sound great, but he was ranked as the RB35, finished as the RB28. And then we had a few big hits here. We had Jacoby Brissett finished as the quarterback 4 after being ranked 18. We had Tyrone Tracy being ranked the running back 13 after being ranked 26. Jameson Williams being ranked wide receiver 30, finishing as a wide receiver 8. And then Trey Tucker finishing as a wide receiver 16 after being ranked as the wide receiver 34. So, again, wasn't all bad, but not the week that I strive for. So we got to get better this week. And I promise you guys that I did look at some things. So let's see how that goes into this week. All right, y'all. So starting with the first matchup, we've got the Pittsburgh Steelers going up against the Chicago Bears. And I'm going with Chicago wide receiver Luther Burden. He's the expert consensus PPR wide receiver 41. Burden ran a season high in routes last week, or in terms of route participation, exceeding the previous week high from the week prior. Had a season high in targets. Pittsburgh right now is allowing the 5th most PPR points to opposing wide receivers. So Burden is, I think he's like a wide receiver 3 for me this week. Again, at this point in the season, we're looking for these talented rookies, right? And Burden is that second round pick from earlier this year. And, we're just waiting for him to be more involved in the offense. And so I think that happens this week, right? He's been trending the last couple weeks, right? And we try to get out ahead of these guys before, before the trend fully comes to fruition here. So Luther Burden, I think, is a solid wide receiver 3 play with some upside, obviously, if his role continues to grow. Other players to consider in this game, Caleb Williams. I know I throw his name out a lot, I feel like, but he's been very good. Like we talked about last week. Outside of he's been very boomer bust, right? So it's going to be either a really big game or where he finishes is a QB1 or he's outside the top 18. All right. So the Pittsburgh defense has been playing better, but Caleb Williams as at home they are favored. And so, I think, and he's always willing to use his legs. So I think he's always going to be in a good spot because of that. Now the big storyline outside of Pittsburgh is, are Aaron Rodgers and Jalen Warren going to play, right? I think Jalen Warren probably has a good chance to play, but they also could hold him back because Kenneth Gainwell is very good back in his own right. But either way, I think Kenneth Gainwell will see some run. So I think, you can play Kenneth Gainwell this week, especially if Aaron Rodgers does not play. I think you probably see them lean a little bit heavier on the running backs this week. Utilize Kenneth Gainwell out of the backfield. Kenneth Gainwell out of the backfield. Jalen Warren, if he goes, I think he'll, you can play him as well. Aaron Rodgers probably is going to try to go. He's going to take it up to the last minute, I think. But I just can't see him playing this week. Again, I'm not a doctor. That's just my own, like, reading the tea leaves. I don't know if he'll play. All right, but let's move on to the next game. We got the Baltimore Ravens hosting the New York Jets. And I'm going with Baltimore tight end Mark Andrews. He's the expert consensus PPR tight end 11. New York Jets allow the 19th most PPR points to opposing tight ends, which, doesn't sound great. But Mark Andrews has finished as a tight end 1 each of the last 3 weeks, right? Only Trey McBride and Dalton Schultz of the tight ends in the top 12 can say that, or that have finished in the top 12 the last 3 weeks can say that, right? He's got 4 touchdowns over his last 3 games, Andrews does. So obviously last week there was the rushing touchdown. What was it? I don't even know how long it was. Like a 40-yard rushing touchdown or whatever it was. So, Andrews are getting it done in different ways, right? But, in all honesty, right, like Lamar Jackson, I think, is in a great spot against this Jets defense, which has been playing better in recent weeks. But, I still think that Mark Andrews is, Lamar Jackson is going to be too much for them to overcome. And, a lot of the a lot of the Lamar Jackson, like, big games tend to correlate to Mark Andrews' big games as well. So, definitely expect him to be involved this week. Other guys I'm looking at, obviously Zay Flowers, obviously Lamar Jackson. On the Jets side, I think the only person that, obviously outside of Breece Hall, that I would even remotely consider would be um, Mason Taylor, maybe, but like even then, not really. This Baltimore defense is playing a lot better. Tyrod Taylor starting. So, the wide receivers might seem interesting, but I don't know if I'm going to that well this week. All right, let's move on to the next game. We've got the New York Giants traveling to Detroit to take on the Detroit Lions. Going with Denver or Detroit running back, rather, David Montgomery. He's the expert consensus PPR running back 24. New York Giants allow the fifth most PPR points to opposing running backs over their last 3 games. Detroit is at home here as 10.5-point favorites. And then, Detroit has an implied team total of 30 points, right? So when you consider all of these things here, I think Dave Montgomery is in a good spot, right? It hasn't been great for Dave Montgomery. I think everyone who drafted David Montgomery was drafting him to be their RB2, hoping that he would get some touchdown opportunities, rush for, 1,000 yards, right? It's not seeming that way right now, right? They've leaned heavily on Jahmyr Gibbs. It has been the Jahmyr Gibbs show. And David Montgomery's basically just been, kind of along for the ride, it seemed. So I think this is more of like a confidence booster here where you can play your David Montgomery. I think this is one of those classic games where, you play all your lines, right? We used to say that all the time, like, hey, the Lions are playing, you put them in your lineup, So I think this is one of those games, right? So Jared Goff, Jahmyr Gibbs, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jamison Williams. Sam Laporta is not playing, unfortunately, as he's on IR. But David Montgomery, I think you could definitely play, again, given the matchup and the potential game script here. All right, let's move on to the next game. We got the Seattle Seahawks traveling Tennessee to take on the Tennessee Titans. And I'm going to go with Seattle running back Kenneth Walker here. He's the expert consensus running back 21, right? Walker was the running back 9 on the week last week. He's led the Seattle running backs in both running back rush share and target share over their last 3 games. He leads the running backs in carries inside the 5-yard line with 4 over the last 3 games as well. Seattle's, they're on the road here, but they're 12.5-point favorites. So I think all of that is set up for Kenneth Walker to have a pretty good game. Head coach Mike McDonald of the Seattle Seahawks was talking about trying to get Walker more involved and get him the ball more. So, and he has been, again, like I said, he's been leading the team in running back rush share the last 3 weeks. So, it's, I don't want to say it's fully trending in his direction, but he's been getting a decent amount of work the last few weeks here. And so I like his spot where he's at. Other players in this game that you can consider, right? I'm going to say Sam Darnold, right? He was obviously a waiver priority for us the last couple weeks. Didn't come through the last 2 weeks, but this week, much better matchup against a Tennessee defense that allows the sixth most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. AJ Barner, the tight end, also in a solid spot after a big PPR game last week. I think Zach Charbonnet, given the game script, you can also play him as well, right? I think if they're heavy favorites, Seattle is, then Zach Charbonnet will at least get some work and possibly even get in around the goal line as well. And then Rashid Shaheed, right? I think he's a guy that's interesting. Saw obviously was traded just a few weeks ago. So 2 weeks ago was barely used in that win against Arizona. Last week was, far more used. I think, game script probably had something to do with that as well. But, saw a huge spike in route participation, had 5 targets. We know Sam Darnold is, he's one of the better deep ball throwers in the league. I mean, he's been the best deep ball thrower in the league this year, right? So Rashid Shaheed, that's what he does well. That's his superpower. And so, I think that Rashid Shaheed is in a good spot against the Tennessee defense, allowing the 6th most fantasy points to wide receivers over their last 3 games. And, we've obviously known from in the past talking about Alec Pierce and um, was it Troy Franklin? There was somebody, I forget who it was for a couple weeks ago, so forgive me, that were playing against Tennessee and were like, hey, this is a good spot. Oh, it was Quentin Johnston. That's what it was. Um, it was Quentin Johnston. And so, you know, this matchup against Tennessee allows, opponents to get over the top of them. I think Rashid Shaheed, again, in a very good spot here. Um, we got Bob Hope 123 question on YouTube. May or Hurts this week? Thanks. I actually have Drake May ranked as my QB1 this week, right? He's got the matchup against Cincinnati. Cincinnati on their last 3 games have allowed the third most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Um, Jalen Hurts, on the other hand, he's in a matchup where the Dallas Cowboys allow the 11th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. I think the question is, when I look at the Dallas Cowboys and that game against Philadelphia, right? Dallas's defense has gotten a little bit better, right? I think it was undersold how much the addition of Quinn Williams has helped their defensive line. Again, it was one game, it was against the Raiders. Um, but that defensive line looked, dominant on Monday night, beyond the fact that they were playing the Raiders. And Philadelphia's defense has been really good as well. So I think this game probably undershoots a little bit more than people think. Whereas I think this New England game and the Cincinnati game probably goes over. So given the game environment, I like Drake May where he's at. I mean, he could have had an even bigger week last week, right? But Travion Henderson scores 3 touchdowns, one of which he caught from Drake May. So and those were all 3 touchdowns on the goal line, right? So for me, again, Drake May, he's my QB1 this week. Jalen Hurts, I have him ranked as the QB4 this week behind Lamar Jackson and then Josh Allen, who played yesterday. So Bob Hope, good luck. Thanks for the question. And that's just a reminder, if you are watching live, always feel free to drop in the chat and ask a question. I'll be more than happy to answer it. All right, let's move on to the next game here. We've got the Indianapolis Colts against the Kansas City Chiefs, and I'm going with, yeah, you guessed it, Indianapolis wide receiver Alec Pierce. He's the expert consensus PPR wide receiver 27. He leads all Indianapolis wide receivers in snaps and routes over their last 3 games, leads the team in targets and yards during that span as well, and he's the wide receiver 18 in PPR points per game over the last 4 weeks with 14.9 PPR points. Now, the matchup here, not particularly strong here, right? Kansas City allows the 20th most PPR points to opposing wide receivers. But this is one of those things where we're chasing the volume here with Alec Pierce, right? Chasing the volume, chasing the upside. Obviously, we know Michael Pittman. He's the guy that I think teams are looking at when when they go to play the Indianapolis, right? He's widely regarded as the team's #1 receiver, which very well is the case. But in terms of the utilization, that's been Alec Pierce, right? And so I'm following that volume. We saw Troy Franklin come through in this spot last week against Kansas City. Um, Again, this game's on the road here against Kansas City. So, maybe not the same situation that Troy Franklin was in, but I think the situation still stands here where I think Alec Pierce is in probably a better spot than wide receiver 27. Right. So that's where I'm going there. And in that game, I really don't like that game. Similar to last week where I didn't like the Denver game, Kansas City game, I really don't like this game all that very much, right? So Kareem Hunt, I think, is in play on the Kansas City side. Rashee Rice, Travis Kelsey, I think, is in a good spot against Indianapolis this week. Like Daniel Jones, though, he's a guy that I'm looking to play else. I'm looking for other options, right? Like Jacoby Brissett is a guy I'm playing over Daniel Jones in a league. He popped up on the injury report with a calf. It could be nothing, it could be something, but I would look to make some I'd look for a pivot option if you could off of Daniel Jones. If he doesn't go, but even other than that, like I think there's Jacoby Brissett, Matthew Stafford, Jared Goff. I think is a guy I'd probably play over Daniel Jones. I think not probably. I would play over Daniel Jones. Brock Purdy is a guy that I could see myself playing over Daniel Jones. So yeah, let's move on to the next matchup here. We've got the Green Bay Packers hosting the Minnesota Vikings, and we are unsure of the injury status of Josh Jacobs at this moment in time. He is dealing with a knee injury. It sounds like he had a contusion. It swelled up and got hit. So it swelled up in the game like really fast, and then he couldn't, didn't really have full range of motion. It was hard to bend it. So he did get a limited practice in on Thursday. He only participated in individual drills. So not a full, not a team practice or team period or anything like that. So I don't really know what to make of that, right? So I'm leaning towards him not playing, right? I'd rather, lean towards him not playing and then get the alert Sunday morning from Ian Rappaport that, oh, Josh Jacobs is so tough, he's going to give it a go. Like, I'd rather do that. I'd rather play that game than sit here thinking, he's going to play, and not make the contingency plans in the event that he doesn't play. So, part of that contingency plan, hopefully for you, is picking up Emmanuel Wilson, or maybe you are lucky. Not, I don't want to say lucky, or maybe you're more fortunate than another person who has Emmanuel Wilson, while the Josh Jacobs manager doesn't have him, right? So now you got better, or maybe even luckier than that, better than that, is that you have Emmanuel Wilson and you're going against the Josh Jacobs manager because their loss has become your gain, right? And actually that's happening in one of in our league of extraordinary people. Anyway, I digress. Emmanuel Wilson, ECR, PPR, running back 20. The matchup, not great. 22nd most PPR points allowed to opposing running backs by the Minnesota Vikings. But Wilson would handle the lead role if Jacobs sits. And also, Jacobs, if he does play, could be limited in some capacity. And so Emmanuel Wilson would still be a viable play in that instance. Other than that, I don't like this game at all. The obvious question I think people are going to ask is, what do I do about Justin Jefferson? I think Justin Jefferson I think the community is quite funny with what we're doing, right? And I'm guilty of it too, right? Like, you look at the expert consensus rankings, and Justin Jefferson is ranked as the wide receiver 12, right? So just the wide receiver one, just a wide receiver one. No one's like planting their flag saying like, oh no, he's still a top 5 option this week, but no one wants to say, yeah, he's not a wide receiver 1 this week, right? I have him ranked as the wide receiver 11 this week. So again, I'm guilty of it myself. I will be honest though, when I did the projections, he came out way worse than that, right? And obviously that's just because of what has happened in recent weeks and whatnot. And then the matchup here against Minnesota, 29th most PPR points against, allowed to opposing wide receivers. So I'm willing to take the shot on Justin Jefferson just because of the talent that he is, but the quarterback situation has been less than stellar for sure. Will that get better? Well, I don't think there's another option coming in, so we're reliant here on JJ McCarthy, doing a better job. And maybe Kevin O'Connell and that staff, Josh McCown, maybe they can find ways to make JJ McCarthy more comfortable, give him some layups, get the ball into some of these playmakers' hands. So yeah, I would play Justin Jefferson, but you know, I'm not ready to say I'm gonna go play like a Tet McMillan over Justin Jefferson or Michael Wilson. I saw one of somebody on Twitter or X was saying they're playing Michael Wilson over Justin Jefferson. I'm not ready to go there either. So yeah, I think Justin Jefferson, you can play him, but it's not going to be pretty, right? So, anything else in this game? No, I don't think there's anything else. Christian Watson, solid wide receiver 3 play, right? Did I say Minnesota before when I was talking about Justin Jefferson and the matchup? I did say Minnesota before. My apologies. Green Bay allows the 24th, the 31st most PPR points to opposing wide receivers, not Minnesota. Well, Minnesota's 29th still, but Green Bay, that's relative to Justin Jefferson. Okay, let's move on. This next game, the Cleveland Browns against the Las Vegas Raiders. And I'm doing something I've never done before. Because promise you guys, I stared up and down at this thing. I was like, this game is gross. I don't know who to play. I don't know who to pick. And I just picked something that made the most sense to me, man. Honestly. We're going with the Raiders defense and special teams, right? They're the expert consensus PPR DST5. DST5, that's pretty high. So, John, why are they here? They're onesies. So, technically, based on my rules, they've got to be like top 10 or outside the top 10 in order for me to bring them in here. But they're rostered in only 33% of Yahoo leagues. And that's why they're in here. 33% of Yahoo leagues, the Raiders defense. They are favored in this game at home, 3.5-point favorites. And say what you will about Shadur Sanders. I'm not going to come here and bash Shadur Sanders, right? I actually do want to see him do well. I want to see him play well. Did I think that he was worthy of being a first-round pick? No. Did I think he was better than a fifth-round pick? Absolutely. So, but what I will say is a very factual statement. Shadur Sanders creates a lot of his own sacks, right? Is the Browns offensive line like perfect? No, by no means, right? Did some of the offensive line and some of the linemen come out and defend Shadur Sanders? Yes, absolutely, because that's what good leaders are going to do, right? But Shadur Sanders, let's call it what it is, creates a lot of sacks on his own. And so that alone, with this Raiders pass rush, led by Max Crosby, is a good spot here for me to be like, yeah, we're playing the Raiders defense. And that being said, you could play the Cleveland defense. I almost put them both in here, but the Cleveland defense rostered in 84% of Yahoo leagues. The Raiders only 33%. So they are definitely a play this week, right? Anything else in this game? There really isn't anything, right? I mean, the Raiders allow the 8th most PPR points to wide receivers. So, maybe you think of Jerry Jeudy, maybe you think of Cedric Tillman. If you think Shadur Sanders can get those guys the ball consistently, which I think he probably can. I think, he'll make some plays, but he'll also give some to the Raiders defense as well, right? In terms of the sacks, right? I don't know. Maybe he'll throw an interception or two, right? The Raiders defense, I know, like, we like to think it's like a terrible defense, which it's not great, right? Like, obviously, you saw what happened on Monday Night Football with Dak and CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens and whatnot. Sure. But, Pete Carroll and his staff, they know how to coach up a defense. And when I watch them just like with my eyes, like they fly around, they make plays. So that part is still true, right? And I think when he was in Seattle, it took a little bit especially in that first year, for that defense to really, get going, right? And in that second year, that's when you were starting to see, like, second and third year was when, like, you started seeing a Legion of Boom, right? So I'm not saying that the Raiders are on their way to that, but it's just one of those things I think about where, like, Pete Carroll is, this Raiders defense, I think, has gotten better, right? And I think we've come into some weeks thinking like, oh, we can take advantage of the Raiders defense, and some weeks it doesn't hit. And I think that's probably part of the reason why, right? All right, but I digress. This game sucks. Anyway, let's move on to the next matchup here. We've got the Jacksonville Jaguars traveling to Arizona to take on the Arizona Cardinals. And I'm going with Jacksonville running back Bashaw Tutin. He's the expert consensus PPR running back 34. Look, he had 15 carries for 74 yards and a touchdown last week, 35% running back rush share last week as well. He looked to be more involved in the offense, right? I've said this on the waiver show, but it seemed like it was a concerted effort to be able to get him involved, get him the football. So, when I look at that, there is definitely for me, some intrigue there with Bashaw too. And now he was dealing with an ankle injury that he suffered in that game. Turns out that it was not. He was able to practice this week, and Travis Etienne pulled up in a non-contact jersey at practice, so he might be dealing with something there. So that makes that makes um, Bashaw Tootin a little bit more intriguing in that sense. So obviously, Jacoby Brissett, he's a guy that we definitely like this week. Um, uh, Trying to think who else. Oh, my Michael Wilson Jr. right there. Michael Wilson. People want to know whether we could play Michael Wilson this week, and absolutely, I think you can play Michael Wilson this week. Jacksonville has not been. They prior to last week, they've been pretty favorable against opposing wide receivers. And Michael Wilson, he's ranked as the expert consensus wide receiver 22. I said on the waiver show, I don't know if he's going to repeat this with Marvin Harrison. Then I was like talking myself back into it, just given like how much volume Jacoby Brissett has been seeing, like in terms of the attempts. And so that, with all of that considered, and then Marvin Harrison's missing this week, he will be out, right? I think Michael Wilson's in another solid spot. Is he going to have 15 catches on 18 targets for 185 yards? And no, he probably won't. But will he will he be more involved in the offense, right? Is he going to see a 30% target share? Maybe not, right? Closer to 20, 25%. I think you could see that. But Trey McBride, fantastic spot here, right? So I think it will be the Trey McBride show. All right. I don't think there's the running back position, right? Trey Benson, I don't know what his deal is. I don't know if he's going to play. But if he doesn't play, then it's Bam Knight. I think you just play Bam Knight. Mike, no Amari DeMarcado. Michael Carter probably will, be buzzing around somewhere. On the Jacksonville wide receivers, Parker Washington and Jacoby Myers, I probably lean Parker Washington again this week. All right, let's move on to the next game. We've got the New Orleans Saints hosting the Atlanta Falcons. And give me my guy, New Orleans tight end Juwan Johnson. He's the expert consensus tight end 14, right? 4 straight double-digit PPR outings. Atlanta allows the 12th most PPR points to opposing tight ends over their last 3 games. Juwan Johnson is the tight end 7 over the last 3 weeks with 13.9 PPR points per game. So yes, I like Juwan Johnson this week. I'm playing Juwan Johnson. I'm playing him over some other names. One other name we'll talk about in just a minute here. Also in this game, I think Tyler Shuck, I can't believe these words come out of my mouth. I think Tyler Shuck is fantasy viable this week, right? I think he's in a good spot. Atlanta, the Atlanta defense allowing the 5th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks over their last 3 games. Chris Olave, obviously, as one of his top targets, along with Juwan Johnson. So all that being said, I think Tyler Shuck in a decent spot. On the Atlanta side, it's possible that like Bijan Robinson catches like 12 passes this week, right? There's no Drake London. I don't know if I can utter this guy's name. I don't know if I can play Mooney. Yeah, right. Yeah, I don't know. You heard that? No, Mooney. Yeah, Darnell Mooney. Right. I don't know if I can play Darnell Mooney. Right. Like I'm not playing him. Right. I said I'm not going to recommend him, but if you're absolutely desperate, you have no other options, then yeah, go for it. But other than that, I'm not. No, I got to see it first. I think Kyle Pitts sees a bump in targets as well, right? New Orleans has allowed the 13th most PPR points to the position over the last 3 games, so solid spot for him as well here. But yeah, I think Bijan catches like 12 passes this week. All right, let's move on to the next game here. We've got the Dallas Cowboys hosting the Philadelphia Eagles, right? So Jake Ferguson, tight end, expert consensus tight end 9. So what does that mean, right? Yeah. Jake Ferguson, 6.5 PPR points per game over the last 3 weeks, has had only 1 top 12 finish over the last 3 games. He's been a little touchdown dependent, right? Philadelphia has only allowed 1 touchdown and just 3 double-digit outings to opposing tight ends on the season. So all in all, it's not a great spot for Jake Ferguson. And again, you can always start him, right? On the hopes that he gets that touchdown. But again, Philadelphia only allowing 1 touchdown on the year. And it was to Evan Ingram on a tight end screen, right? Down near the goal line. So I'm not expecting a big day for Jake Ferguson. Tight ends that I would play ahead of Jake Ferguson include Juwan Johnson, uh, Kate Otten, Mark Andrews, Hunter Henry, right? These are all guys that I would play ahead of Jake Ferguson this week. Now, if you have them, I'm not saying drop them and go pick up somebody else to start them, right? But if you have the space on your roster and you could pick up one of these guys and start them over Jake Ferguson, then yeah, I think that's a move you can make. All right, so let's move on to. This game, I think, you know, self-explanatory, I would say, right? You're not benching a CeeDee Lamb, you're not benching a George Pickens. You're going to play those guys regardless of the Philadelphia defense. Dak Prescott, mm, again, this is a game I could see going under, right? But I would play Dak. I feel like you're kind of have to, and like what other quarterback options do you have this week, right? Jacoby Brissett is a guy that I would play over Dak, right? But I think that's about it. Like I'm not picking up Bryce Young to play over Dak. Like I don't think I would play Brock Purdy over Dak. Yeah, Jalen Hurts. I think if unless you have Drake May as the other option, right, or Lamar Jackson, right, as the other option, I think you play Jalen Hurts because just on the chance that he scores 2 rushing touchdowns, right? Like I don't think you want that on your bench. So, also the matchup looks good on paper, so I don't think people are even considering that as an option. All right, let's move on to the next game here. We got Tampa Bay Buccaneers against the LA Rams this Sunday Night Football. And so I'm going with Tampa Bay tight end Cade Otton. He's the expert consensus tight end 12. Now, look, he's scored at least 8 PPR points in 5 of his last 6 games. The LA Rams allow the 5th most PPR points per game to opposing tight ends over their last 3 weeks. And then you possibly walk into a situation here with no Bucky Irving and or no Chris Godwin. So I think you see continued usage and continued utilization in the passing game. He's also a pivot option, right? If you have a Bucky Irving, right? So for me, I have several leagues where I have Bucky Irving. And one of them, I'm like, oh damn, I don't know who to flex, right? If Bucky Irving can't go, who do I play? Well, luckily in that league, I have George Kittle. So I'm like, oh, well, if Bucky can't play, then my pivot just becomes Cade Otton, right? So I think he's a great option for that as well. But I think he's definitely a top 10 tight end this week, in terms of PPR scoring. Everyone I know else in this game. This game is going to be interesting for sure. But of the tertiary options, I think Tez Johnson's always interesting. Sean Tucker, if Bucky Irving can't go, Sean Tucker becomes very interesting, right? The matchup, not great. 19th most PPR points allowed to opposing running backs for the LA Rams over their last 3 games. But Sean Tucker, we obviously know the monster upside that he has. And if last week was any indication that they should probably get him the rock more, I think that the message was probably received. And if there's no Bucky Irving this week, then yeah, Sean Tucker gets a green light, I would think. Then people would the next question would be like, well, what do I do with Rachaad White? I think given the lack of options in the passing game, and this is probably going to be a pass-heavy game script for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I think you can throw Rachaad White in there as well. I could see him catching a few passes in PPR, scoring, maybe even scoring around the goal line, right? I think they still rely on him to do some of that stuff. But I wouldn't be surprised to see Bucky Irving or Sean Tucker rather lead the tandem in overall touches. All right, let's move on to the final game that we're going to talk about today. And that's the Carolina Panthers against the San Francisco 49ers. And we're talking Carolina quarterback, Bryce Young, who's the expert consensus quarterback 18. Now, look, he was the quarterback 2 last week with 31.8 standard quarterback points. Um, San Francisco has allowed the most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks over their last 3 games. His weapons are in a good spot, right? Roy McMillan in a very solid, very, very good spot. San Francisco allowing the most PPR points over their last 3 games to opposing wide receivers. Xavier Legette, eh, maybe. I'm not even going to go there. But and then you got a high scoring offense with the San Francisco offense that you have to keep up with, right? So I think Bryce Young in a solid spot here for sure. I'm going to check where I have him, but I want to say he's a top 12 option for me this week. Top 15. Top 15 option. The guys right ahead of him, I have Brock Purdy, I have Sam Darnold, and then I've got Bryce Young at 15. So, but I would not be surprised if he finished in that top 12 this week, right? I think he's in a very good spot. It's actually interesting. There's a lot of like streaming quarterbacks that are in some solid spots this week. But yeah, so Bryce Young, definitely a good option. Ted McMillan, Ted Roy. I try not to call him Ted because he came out and said he doesn't like being called Ted. So I'm not going to call the man something he doesn't like being called, even if he probably will never hear me call him that. Unless you're listening, T-Mac, because appreciate you. But anyway, so T-Mac, Roy McMillan, I think he's in a great spot. Obviously came off the big week last week. He's a guy that I've been pounding the table for all year. So it was great. I was happy to see him, have that big game last week. Brock Purdy, like I said, he's in a good spot as well this week against Carolina. More about his offensive ecosystem than how his matchup, what his matchup looks like. Ricky Pearsall, I would easily go back to that. Well, you guys know how I feel about Ricky Pearsall. So definitely a guy that I would continue to look to in those situations. Rico Dowdle, obviously, Christian McCaffrey revenge game. I don't think it matters because Christian McCaffrey, he was just going to do what he does already anyway. Plus he got traded. So, I mean, yeah, it's a revenge game, but I'm sure there's some emotions playing against your former team. So, probably a big Christian McCaffrey game as well. All right. Let's move on to the starts of the week. And last week, y'all, man, I'm tired of saying this. I really am tired of saying this, that it was not a good week. But last week was the absolute worst week. That's probably the worst week in the history of starts of the week. Seriously, bro. Like, absolutely. LA Chargers quarterback Justin Herbert flopped, QB 31. Josh Jacobs, the RB 50, he was injured. So I guess I get some relief from that. Wide receiver Jalen Waddle, flop, wide receiver 40. Tight end Colston Loveland, that one's probably really my own fault. The tight end 17, like, really was just my own fault. Cole Kmet was obviously back. I was just betting on Colston Loveland taking that leap, right, in a good matchup against Minnesota. So I was just banking on him taking that leap. Turns out Cole Kmet actually out-snapped him, out-targeted him, out-routed him. So, I mean, it was still I don't want to say a solid week for Colston Loveland, but it was like a fine week for Colston Loveland, given what actually transpired in the, beyond the box score. So, say all that to say, much better week this week, guys. I don't want to say I guarantee it. I can't guarantee something I can't control, but I promise you that I definitely put my best effort into these starts of the week, as I always do, but looked at, some different things. And yeah, let's just get into it, man. So, starting at the quarterback start of the week, let's go with Arizona quarterback Jacoby Brissett going up against Jacksonville. Yes, we're going back to the Jacksonville well. Jacoby Brissett has scored no less than 19 fantasy points in any of his 5 starts this year. Jacksonville has allowed the 12th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks over their last 3 games. And then Trey McBride also in a great spot, as Jacksonville has allowed the most PPR points to opposing tight ends over their last 3 games. They have allowed the second most PPR points to opposing tight ends on this season. So this allows us, right, playing Jacoby Brissett allows us to get some exposure to that game or to that matchup here for Trey McBride in a game with a 47.5 point total that's being played in a dome. So yeah, Jacoby Brissett, I like him in this spot at home. Just a slight underdog, which is usually pretty good, right? You don't want a large underdog. You don't want a large favorite. You could want a large favorite, but I think those, 1.5, 2.5 point spreads are typically perfect because you get some back and forth, especially if you think the game goes over. So I like this spot for Jacoby Brissett quite a bit. Um, for my running back start of the week, I'm going with Baltimore running back Derrick Henry. Was the RB8 last week and gets a New York Jets defense that has allowed the 8th most PPR points to opposing running backs over their last 3 games. Henry's in line for a big day with top 5 upside as he's a heavy, heavy home favorite. The Baltimore Ravens are favored at home by like 13.5 points, right? So Derrick Henry in a fantastic spot this week. Next up, we got Cincinnati wide receiver T. Higgins going up against the New England Patriots. He's the wide receiver 2 in PPR points per game over the last 3 weeks. Obviously, that has a lot to do with, his big game right before the bye week. And now he gets a New England defense that's allowing the 9th most PPR points to opposing wide receivers over their last 3 games. And with no Jamar Chase this week due to that suspension, Higgins should see even more targets. So I think you fire him up this week. Um, I think you fire him up this week. And, also this week, I think you can, obviously a lot of the suspense is around is Cincinnati. Is Joe Burrow going to play this week, right? So if he gets Joe Burrow back, I think you fire him up. If he doesn't get Joe Burrow back, I think you also fire him up as well. So T. Higgins, great spot either way. Staying in that game for the tight end start of the week, let's go New England tight end Hunter Henry as he faces off against the Cincinnati Bengals. Over the last 3 weeks, Henry has averaged 6.5 PPR points per game. He hasn't scored double-digit PPR points since week 4, but none of that matters this week because he's set to face off against Cincinnati, who on the season have allowed the most PPR points to the position on the season. So that alone right there, Cincinnati gives Henry top 12 upside this week. Now, I was stammering here. I don't stammering. Is that how did I use that word correctly? I don't know. I was lost in thought while I was sitting here reading through my T. Higgins start of the week, and it dawned on me that I never talked about the Bengals. I never talked about the Bengals game. So I don't know why. I must have missed it when I was prepping. Or is it even on the board? It has to be on the board because okay. My apologies, guys. I'm like going through some stuff over here, but I'm realizing I never talked about that game. So was there somebody that is interesting that we're looking at? Mac Hollins is a wide receiver 39. That's interesting. He interests me a lot, but my interest in him depends on what happens with Kayshon Boutte. Sorry, we're like going through this. Kayshon Boutte is a wide receiver 50. So Boutte is practicing. Looks like he's healthy again. So if he can go, I think he takes this job back. But I also think that Mac Hollins has earned some more work. So that's interesting. I think one of those guys are solid plays. I also think Noah Fant is a solid play as well, right? He's the tight end 18. So if you need a tight end streamer, I think you can go to that well as well this week. Again, no Jamar Chase. There's got to be some targets that go around. Yoshi Voss, is he going to get all that work? I have no idea. I don't think so. So I think Chase Brown gets a bump for that as well. But he's already ranked pretty high. So I don't know why I didn't talk about that game. I apologize. I'm not gonna, stew over it for so much longer. So, you guys get some Bengals Patriots analysis at the end of this show here. So, appreciate y'all for listening. That is going to wrap up the Week 12 matchup show. We're heading into the home stretch of the fantasy season. These next few weeks, every decision matters. We are locked into the playoffs. Tug Drug Fishing says, "Good morning, bro. Good morning, brother. Good morning." Right during the outro. So hope you have good luck to you, Tug Drug Fishing. If you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat and I'll answer it after the show. Um, but yeah, we are 3 weeks out, y'all. Right? Trade deadlines are coming up next week. So if you got some trades that you want to make, go ahead and make those trades. Just remember the matchup show next week, 7 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday, right? 7 p.m. Eastern Wednesday, no Friday morning show. So if you want to catch the matchup show, it'll be 7 p.m. Eastern Wednesday. We'll be live. So, yeah, we are approaching that stretch, right? Some of you guys have got that asterisk in your name, right? Some of you guys have clinched playoffs already. And that's fantastic. Love that for you guys, right? So if you haven't, just keep fighting, right? I don't know about you guys, but a lot of my leagues, right? It's like very close, where the last place team even has a chance, right? So, stay locked in, trust your process. If you enjoyed the show, make sure you like the video, subscribe, turn on those notifications so you don't miss the next waiver show on Tuesday. You don't miss our future matchup shows or our next matchup show, which is the Thanksgiving extravaganza, right? So, and also make sure you get over to the Patreon, right? Patreon.com/FFDX. So you get the free cheat sheet that drops every Tuesday. You get the weekly waiver wire article, expanded rankings, and the Sunday Q&A for just $1 a month. It's absolutely free right now through the end of week 13. So just go over there, check that out. Appreciate y'all for tuning in this morning. Good luck in your week 12 matchups. Get those wins, and I'll catch y'all next time. Peace.